Hello everybody, welcome to Snyder's Inc. And today we got another Starbucks video. Today you're going to get 3 videos from me, 2 reactions and a review. The review is going to be a payback 2023 from WWE, but we're not going to worry about that right now. This video, this is 6 serial killers with the lowest IQs. Yesterday we did the highest, today we're doing the lowest. I need y'all to hit the like button, hit subscribe button, comment what you think down below. Let's go.
2 years ago, I made a video called 6 Serial Killers with the Highest IQs, in which I of course talked about some of the brainiest serial killers to have ever lived, such as Ted Bundy, Harold Shipman, and of course, Ted Kaczynski. And I've been planning on making a sort of sequel to it for a long time. So now I'm going to be looking at killers on the other end of the scale. There won't be any law students, doctors, or Harvard-educated mathematics professors on this list. These people are, for lack of a better term, dumb as a bag of hammers, yet no less deadly.
Okay, what's it called? Dumb as a bag of what?
Won't be any law students, doctors, or Harvard-educated mathematics professors on this list. These people are, for lack of a better term, dumb as a bag of hammers, yet no less
Dumb as a bag of hammers? I don't know, I can't fully hear it.
deadly than their, quote, genius counterparts. Here are 6 serial killers with the lowest IQs.
Fred West, IQ 84.
There are 2 infamous boyfriend and girlfriend / husband and wife serial killer duos in the history of the UK. The Moors murderers, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, and of course, Fred and Rose West, though you certainly can't compare them intellectually. Ian Brady was believed to have possessed a genius-level IQ of 170. Fred West, on the other hand, was an illiterate bumpkin who had an IQ of just 84. Fred West was born on September 29, 1941 in Muchmarcle, Herefordshire, as the second of 6 children. His parents, Walter Stephen West and Daisy Hannah Hill, were known for their excessive use of alcohol, and their household was plagued by poverty, violence, and dysfunction. Fred's father...
Yeah, that's gonna cause someone to go on a dark path. I mean, you shouldn't cause them to go a serial killer, but usually it starts with a family full of violence. That's what they see and that's what they expect. That's what they're used to in their life, is violence, and that's how they believe families are. So that's usually why also most times in situations when you're in a your house families like that, your relationships usually end up that way because that's how your brain is conditioned to believe that's how relationships are.
Father, Walter, was described as a strict and violent man who physically abused his wife and children. Fred also claimed to have been sexually abused by his mother and said that incest was a regular part of family life. Walter worked as a farm labourer and was known to be sexually deviant, often exposing himself to his own children. Walter's abusive behaviour had a profound impact on Fred's upbringing, contributing to the formation of his violent and deviant tendencies. The family lived in a run-down cottage without electricity or running water. They faced significant financial struggles, and Fred grew up in a deprived and neglectful environment. Despite the difficult circumstances, Fred's parents managed to maintain a semblance of stability through his father's sporadic employment. As a child, Fred West displayed troubling behaviour. He was known to be socially awkward, struggled academically, and exhibited an early interest in voyeurism and sexual deviance. There are reports that he engaged in acts of bestiality and had a fascination with death from an early age. These early signs of deviant behaviour would later manifest in his criminal activities. At the age of 16, West left school and began working as a labourer, taking on various odd jobs. He later found employment as a gravedigger, a role that would further expose him to death and macabre surroundings. Fred's criminal activities...
Yeah, I don't think a guy who has an interest in death should be a gravedigger. I think that might be a little bit... just promoting him, just guiding him along here to what he should be. There's no one to blame for it. I don't think that was the best choice for him to have for work.
Began to surface during his teenage years. He was caught stealing, and his criminal record grew to include offences such as theft, breaking and entering, and assault. He was also known to engage in acts of indecent exposure. In 1962, at the age of 21, Fred married his first wife, Rena Costello. They had 2 children together, one of whom, Charmaine, was actually Rena's daughter from a previous relationship. The marriage was troubled. Fred's violent and abusive tendencies emerged within the relationship, and he was frequently unfaithful. The marriage deteriorated further when Rena discovered that Fred had been having sexual relationships with other women. He had a reputation for being a womanizer and frequently engaged in extramarital affairs. His charm and manipulative nature allowed him to establish romantic connections, often targeting vulnerable women. Fred's deviant behavior continued to escalate as he indulged in his dark fantasies. He developed a particular interest in voyeurism, secretly observing others' intimate activities. This fascination with the private lives of others would later play a significant role in his crimes. Fred's transition into a serial killer began in the late 1960s and early 1970s as he embarked on a horrific spree of sexual abuse, torture, and murder. It all began when he met a 15-year-old girl named Rosemary Letts. Fred and Rose met in early 1969, shortly after Rose's 15th birthday. They met at a bus stop in Cheltenham, England. Fred was 27 years old at the time. Rose was initially repulsed by Fred's appearance, but she was flattered by the attention he continued to lavish on her the following days. Rose twice refused to go on a date with Fred, but allowed him to accompany her home. In their initial conversations, Fred quickly discovered that although Rose had never had a boyfriend, she was very promiscuous. Rose soon became a frequent visitor at the Lake House Caravan Park, where Fred lived with his 2 children. Rose became a willing childminder to Fred's daughters, who she noted were neglected, and whom she initially treated with care and affection. Despite Rose's care for the girls, it was actually her who murdered Charmaine, presumably in a fit of anger. This happened while Fred was serving a prison sentence for theft at Lay Hill Prison. In a chilling turn of events, Charmaine's body was dismembered and buried in the garden of their home on Midland Road, before Fred moved the body to the back garden of the building. Their next victim was none other than Fred's ex-wife, Rena Costello, who visited Fred to obtain custody of her 2 daughters in mid to late August.
Yeah, this 15-year-old's a little bit insane. Who just in rage kills one of the daughters because she's just angry, and then kills the ex-wife. Like, this girl is already insane. So yeah, these 2 are just a perfect fucking couple of craziness. The 2 maybe not around each other. Danger to everyone.
1971. Fred and Rose most likely killed her to avoid any suspicion as to the whereabouts of Charmaine. Fred strangled Rena before her dismembered body was buried in Letterbox Field in Muchmarcle. Following this, Fred and Rose were moved to a new home, a house where they would continue their horrific reign of terror, and one that would go down in history as one of the most infamous and cursed houses in British history. 25 Cromwell Street, the House of Horrors. 25 Cromwell Street was more than just a residence. It was a carefully crafted lair designed to facilitate the West's crimes. Fred, with his background in construction, modified the property extensively, incorporating hidden spaces, secret chambers, and false walls. These architectural modifications allowed them to conceal their activities and keep their victims hidden from prying eyes. The West targeted vulnerable young women, often offering them employment, accommodation, or assistance. Their charm and apparent kindness masked their sinister intent lurking beneath. Once inside the house, the victims would become trapped in a nightmare of abuse, torture, and eventual murder. Within the confines of 25 Cromwell Street, Fred and Rose unleashed their sadistic tendencies upon their victims. The cellar of the house became a horrific torture chamber, where the victims endured prolonged periods of physical and psychological torment. Bound, sexually abused, and subjected to extreme acts of violence, the victims faced unimaginable suffering at the hands of their captors. Rose would also bring home men to engage in lewd acts with, while Fred would watch from a nearby closet. One of the men was apparently Rose's own father. The couple's next victim, Linda Goff, was a lodger at 20.
There is so much wrong with what I am hearing by these people. Let's go down this, shall we? These people. This 15-year-old girl enjoys killing people. He's killing, the torturing and killing people inside a basement of their own home. And then she's bringing home people. She's bringing home men to do to have sex with while her husband watches it from a nearby closet. What of her being her own father? Why would them two are just fucked the hell up. Everyone here is just fucked up.
25 Cromwell Street, who was last seen alive in April 1973 and shared sex partners with Rose. Following her disappearance, Goff's mother travelled to Cromwell Street to inquire as to her daughter's whereabouts and saw Rose wearing her daughter's clothes and slippers. Fred and Rose's next victim was 15-year-old Caroline Cooper. She was lured to the West's house when they found her waiting at a bus stop. Like Linda Goff, the exact details of her murder are unknown. Over the next 13 years, Fred and Rose would kill 7 more women, at least that we know of. Their last confirmed victim was in fact their own daughter, Heather West. Heather Ann West was born on October 17, 1970, and grew up in 25 Cromwell Street. She lived with her parents and many siblings in an environment marked by abuse, violence, and secrecy. Heather's life was filled with turmoil as she witnessed and experienced the horrific acts committed by her parents. Fred and Rose subjected Heather to physical and emotional abuse, along with the other members of their family. In August 1987, when Heather was 17 years old, she disappeared. Initially, her disappearance did not attract immediate attention, as Fred and Rose maintained a web of control and manipulation over their family members. However, concerns about Heather's whereabouts began to arise. Heather had suffered a brutal end at the hands of her parents. She had been murdered, and her body was dismembered and buried in the garden of their home. Fred and Rose killed her because she was trying to escape from the house by applying for numerous jobs in the hopes that she'd be able to move for work, and her parents knew that she would reveal what the two of them had done if she escaped. It's worth noting that there were in fact 2 women who managed to escape from the Wests in the 1970s. The first was Caroline Owens. In 1972, when Caroline was 17 years old, she was hired as a nanny by Fred and Rose. They came across as a seemingly normal couple, and Caroline had no idea about their dark past. On her first day of work, Caroline was abducted by the Wests and taken to their home. She was then raped and tortured by Fred and Rose for 12 hours, after being threatened with murder, as well as Fred threatening to give her to his, quote, black friends as a toy. They also continued to force Caroline to work as a nanny for their children. Seeing that this was her only hope of not being killed, she went along with it. One day, when she was visiting a laundrette with Rose, she said she needed to quickly go to a local shop. Knowing she couldn't forcibly stop Caroline in public, Rose had to let her go. Caroline then walked out of the laundrette and returned to her mother's home. Her mother reported Fred and Rose to the police, and they were arrested for assault, but they ended up only having to pay a £50 fine and served absolutely no jail time. The second girl to escape was Jane Haynes.
How the hell does that happen? London? UK? How does that happen? How does someone get all that reported and then they go, hey, can you just pay £50, £50? Okay, you get for that? Okay, go out here. We don't want to deal with you.
Hamer. Jane moved in with the Wests in 1977 at the age of 17, after running away from home. She was initially welcomed into the family, and she even became close to Fred and Rose's daughter, Heather. However, Jane soon began to suspect that something was wrong. She noticed that Fred and Rose were often very controlling, and they would often argue in front of her. She also noticed that Fred would sometimes disappear for days at a time. One day, Jane was cleaning the cellar when she found a blood-stained mattress. She was horrified and confronted Fred about it. Fred told her that the mattress was from a previous tenant, but Jane didn't believe him. Most horrifying was that she would often hear cries coming from the cellar. The cries were being made by Heather, as she pleaded with her father to stop every time he would take her down there. Jane would become close to Heather, with the latter eventually telling her to leave and save herself. She later told Fred and Rose she was moving out, but she unfortunately did not go to the police, as she felt that they would not believe her. 5 years after the murder of Heather West, an incident occurred at the West's home in which Fred raped his 13-year-old daughter Louise, with Rose saying that she was, quote, asking for it. Over the next few weeks, Louise would be raped 3 more times, with Rose finding her in pain on the bathroom floor on one occasion and simply saying, well, what did you expect? Following this,
I want these two to be sentenced to death. I want these two to die. I'll say that. These two are sick, twisted, not good human beings. These are evil fuckers. These are sadistic, heartless, pathetic, evil fuckers who deserve to die. I will say that confidently.
Louise told a close friend what her father had done to her. The friend then told her mother, who reported Fred and Rose to the police. The police raided the West's home and found items related to sexual activities. Louise described her father's actions to the police, and medical examinations revealed evidence of the abuse she had endured. The rest of the West children also told the police about Fred and Rose's abuse, with them also mentioning that their parents threatened to, quote, bury them under the patio like Heather if they told anyone. In February 1994, the police obtained a search warrant for the West's residence. The warrant was grounded based on the suspicion of Fred's involvement in the sexual assault and murder of Heather. During the search of the property, human remains were discovered buried in the garden. The remains were identified as those of Heather West. This discovery intensified the investigation and expanded its scope. The police conducted a thorough search of the property, including the house, garden, cellar, and other areas. The remains of multiple individuals were found in various locations on the property, revealing the potential involvement of Fred and Rose in multiple murders. Forensic experts were brought in to meticulously examine the remains and gather evidence to build a case against the Wests. Fred was arrested on February 25, 1994, initially on the suspicion of murder, while Rose was arrested on February 28, 1994. Both were taken into custody for questioning and further investigation. Testimonies from friends, acquaintances, and former lodgers at the West's home provided additional evidence and painted a disturbing picture of the couple's abusive and violent behavior. These testimonies corroborated the notion that Fred and Rose were involved in criminal activities, including sexual assault, torture, and murder. Unfortunately, Fred West would never face justice for his crimes. On January 1, 1995, Fred was found dead in his prison cell at Winson Green Prison in Birmingham. He had taken his own life by hanging himself. He had lived his life as a vicious and cruel monster, but died a coward who didn't want to face the consequences.
I hate to sound like a dick, at least he's dead. That's all my response is, at least he's dead.
For his actions. Rose's trial began in October 1995 at Winchester Crown Court. She faced charges related to 10 murders, child cruelty, and rape. In November 1995, she was found guilty of all counts and was given a whole life sentence, meaning she will never be released from prison. There's a story that during her early years in prison, Rose began a relationship with one of her fellow prisoners, and that prisoner was none other than Myra Hindley. I guess because Myra had been in prison for around 30 years by that point, she was pretty desperate and decided to hook up with the fat woman who'd previously settled for the crazy village idiot. Everyone in the UK was furious that Fred West had escaped punishment, and it's easy to see why. Everyone wanted to see this evil oaf on trial and handed a sentence that would see him sent to prison for the rest of his life. Instead, one of the UK's most infamous serial killers never faced trial, and the innocent women he killed never received justice for the horrible crimes committed against them.
I disagree with that statement. The reason why I know it's kind of hard to say I disagree with that statement. Because to me, life in prison isn't justice. I know it might be to some, but with the abuse these people taking, especially the children there, that man needed to be sentenced to death. I think the woman did too. Both of them should have been. But at the end of the day, Fred's gone. Fred died. However he died, I don't care. He's dead, and that to me, that's good enough. Because he's going to hell, that's guaranteed.
Hey, just before we move on to the next segment, I have to mention something I failed to bring up before, which someone will definitely point out in the comments. Fred's very first murder victim that we know of was actually Anne McFall, the 18-year-old nanny of Fred and Rena's children. She'd had an affair with Fred, which resulted in her becoming pregnant with his child. In July 1967, the two got into an argument, which ended with Fred stabbing Anne, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, to death, before burying her body in a field in Much Marcle. If anything, this shows just how evil this dumb bastard was, killing not only an innocent girl, but also his unborn child. It really is easy to see why the British public still hates the West so much to this day.
Gary Ridgway, you sound familiar.
This next killer, despite having an even lower IQ than Fred West at 82, can boast that he is actually the second most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, to Mary and Thomas Ridgway. He had two brothers and grew up in a tumultuous household, marked by arguments and violence between his parents. Gary later stated that his mother was controlling and domineering, while his father was aloof and distant, leading to a strained relationship with both of them. During his formative years, Gary had a troubled childhood. He struggled with bedwetting until the age of 13, which severely impacted his self-esteem and contributed to feelings of shame and humiliation. Having an estimated IQ of 82, he did poorly in school. He even had to redo a single school year twice before he could get passing grades. In 1963, aged 14, Gary attempted to kill a 6-year-old boy by stabbing him, but was unsuccessful and never caught for the act. As he matured, he became introverted and socially awkward, leading to difficulties in forming meaningful relationships. His feelings of inadequacy and rejection further fueled his growing anger and resentment. In his teenage years, Gary began to show signs of troubling behavior. He would often fantasize about overpowering and controlling women, which hinted at the dark desires that would later manifest in his crimes. However, his early criminal activities were primarily related to stealing and petty theft. After graduating from high school in 1969, serving as a supply ship petty officer during the Vietnam War, his military service lasted until 1971, when he was honorably discharged. Gary's life took a significant turn in 1973, when he married his first wife, Claudia Craig. Their marriage was plagued with constant arguments, fueled by Gary's serial infidelity. He frequently visited prostitutes, an activity that introduced him to his future victims. His interactions with sex workers provided him with a sense of control and dominance over vulnerable women, further solidifying his violent fantasies. And it wouldn't be long before his violent tendencies turned deadly.
My dumbass just took a minute to realize who this is. I would not have bought this guy was a low IQ, because this guy's a sadistic bastard. I would have thought he had, I'm not going to say he's a genius, but I would have thought he had a good IQ for the way he tortured and took the life of people.
And he would begin his reign of terror. Between 1982 and 1998, the Seattle area was plagued by a string of murders of young women, most of whom were involved in sex work or vulnerable in some way. The killer would dump the victims' bodies in or around the Green River, earning him the moniker, the Green River Killer. His modus operandi was typically strangulation, and he often returned to the crime scenes to engage in necrophilia. Of course, as we all know, that killer was Gary Ridgway. Here are just 8 of his victims. Wendy Cofield, a 16-year-old sex worker, was one of his earliest known victims. She was last seen alive on July 8, 1982, before her body was found in the Green River on July 15, 1982. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. On July 25th the same year, 23-year-old Deborah Bonner, another sex worker, went missing. Her body was discovered near Highway 410 on August 12, 1982, also showing signs of strangulation. Marcia Chapman, a 31-year-old mother of 2, disappeared on August 1, 1982. Her remains were found in the Green River on August 15th of that same year. 16-year-old Opal Mills and 17-year-old Cynthia Hines disappeared on August 12, 1982. Their remains were discovered on August 15th in the Green River. Gary's criminal activities continued into 1983 when he murdered Carol Christensen, a 21-year-old sex worker. She disappeared on May 3, 1983, and her body was found on May 22nd. 17-year-old Giselle LaVaughn was last seen on November 1st, 1985. Her remains were discovered on November 27th in the Green River. Rebecca Marrero, a 20-year-old sex worker, disappeared on December 3rd, 1988. Her body was found on December 21st in the Green River.
This is a question I can never actually get an answer to because it always takes a different reason. But what makes someone get into sex work? I mean, it's not really a good living. It's not a good way to make income. You don't get really anything good out of it. Like, what makes you do it? That's one thing I can't figure out. What makes someone do it?
The Green River Task Force was formed in 1982 to investigate the growing number of disappearances and murders. However, Gary's cunning and ability to blend into society allowed him to elude capture for many years. He skillfully avoided suspicion by maintaining a seemingly normal family life and working as a truck painter, which gave him access to isolated areas where he could dispose of the victims' bodies. Throughout the investigation, the task force collected extensive evidence from the crime scenes and victims' bodies. However, despite having some physical evidence, they struggled to identify a suspect and establish a clear link between the crimes due to lack of advanced forensic technology available at the time. During the investigation, Gary did come under suspicion, partly because he had been previously arrested in 1982 for soliciting an undercover police officer posing as a sex worker. His name appeared on the list of potential suspects early on, but without concrete evidence, he remained under the radar. The key breakthrough in the case came with advancements in DNA analysis. The Green River Task Force revisited the evidence collected from the crime scenes using the improved DNA technology. They discovered a match between Ridgway's DNA and evidence left at the crime scenes. This breakthrough firmly established him as the Green River Killer, with the
That gigantic grin on his face is so... I hate it. I hate it so much. He has such the... You can somewhat tell there's evil behind him. You just wouldn't guess how sadistic and brutal it actually is. You wouldn't guess how evil it actually is, but you can tell there's some evil there.
DNA evidence linking him to the crimes, law enforcement put him under close surveillance. Undercover officers collected his DNA through discarded items like a cigarette butt and a cup. The DNA samples were then compared to the evidence from the crime scenes, further strengthening the case against him. On November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was taken into custody at his workplace in Kenworth Truck Factory in Renton, Washington. After his arrest, he cooperated with the investigators and confessed to the murders of 71 women. His detailed accounts helped investigators locate the remains of several victims, offering closure to their families. In December 2003, Gary pleaded guilty to 48 counts of murder as part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For a significant portion of his time in prison, Gary was kept in solitary confinement. This measure was taken to protect him from potential harm by other inmates who might target him due to the nature of his crimes. After his arrest and confession, authorities continued to investigate unsolved murders and missing persons cases to see if they could be linked to him. Although Gary's claims to 71 victims were not all confirmed, he remains one of the most prolific serial killers in US history. Over the years, Gary has been the subject of various interviews and documentaries exploring his crimes and psychology. He has spoken to journalists and psychologists about his actions and motivations, offering chilling insights into the mind of a serial killer. It's worth noting that throughout his entire reign of terror, Gary carried on living a normal life, being married 3 times, and even fathered a son with his second wife, Marcia Lorene Brown. According to his son Matthew, Gary was a very loving father who often did various activities with him, such as taking him fishing and going for bike rides, though Gary would apparently sometimes use a picture of Matthew to lure his victims, presumably pretending Matthew was missing, and use the picture to get the women's attention by asking if they'd seen him. Gary also claims that Matthew was with him for one of the murders, but we only have Gary's word to go on, so it's hard to say whether he's telling the truth. It really did seem like Gary fooled everyone around him, especially his third wife, Judith, who really had no idea what her husband was doing. After he was arrested, Judith was quoted as saying, "I love the man I married, and I hate the one who took him away." It's easy to see why she'd feel that way, as it would have been a nerve-shattering shock for Judith to find that her beloved husband was none other than the infamous, but not too...
Yeah, I wouldn't know how I'd feel if I was with someone and then found out that the person I was married to was a fucking serial killer. That'd be one fucking shock that I don't think anyone would want to experience. You wouldn't know how to process it. You'd think they're lying, you'd think they're making it up, you'd come up with any rational explanation of what is going on besides the fact that they actually did it. Because you wouldn't want to convince yourself that they actually did it. You would want to blame someone else or say someone else did it. You just wouldn't want to admit it yourself.
Bright, Green River Killer. Just as my video on serial killers with the highest IQs had Charlene Gallego, a violinist prodigy from a wealthy family who literally got away with several murders thanks to her parents finding her a good lawyer, we have a woman who, honestly...
This woman's insane. Oh, this is the crazy woman. This is the actual insane, crazy-ass woman who just... There's no doubt she's not all there. She's all the far short of a happy meal. You know what I'm saying? She's fucking God, psychotic. She's insane. Oh man, I watched the interview with this woman. This woman's not there. She's just not there. She's not in the reality we live in. She's somewhere else.
Honestly, never really stood a chance in life. Eileen Carol Warnos was born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, to Diane Warnos and Leo Dale Pittman. Her parents' tumultuous relationship was marred by abuse, with Warnos' father being absent for her childhood due to his incarceration for child molestation. Eileen would never meet him, as he was in prison before she was born, and hung himself in prison when she was 13. As a result of her father's actions, Eileen's mother struggled to raise her and her older brother Keith on her own. The family lived in poverty, and Diane Warnos struggled with alcoholism. Despite her mother's efforts, Eileen faced a difficult upbringing with limited stability and love, setting the stage for a troubled adolescence. Eventually, Eileen's mother abandoned her and her brother, leaving them with their paternal grandparents. Eileen's grandmother died of liver failure. Meanwhile, her grandfather had been, according to her later account, beating and raping her for several years, so it seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree when it came to him and Eileen's father. She engaged in petty theft and sexual activities at a young age, possibly as a means of seeking the affection and validation she lacked in her home life. Obviously this means she rarely if ever attended school, meaning she was very poorly educated, with extremely limited academic skills. At just 14 years old, she became pregnant with the child of one of her grandfather's friends and was sent to a home for unwed mothers, where she gave birth to a baby boy, whom she later gave up for adoption. By her late teens, Eileen had dropped out of school and began living a transient lifestyle.
This is a girl who's never stood a fucking chance. That doesn't undo her craziness, but she would never stood a chance at success. Honestly, she never stood a fucking chance.
Hitchhiking across the country and engaging in prostitution to survive. During this period, she claimed to have been the victim of sexual assault and abuse on multiple occasions, further contributing to her emotional and psychological distress. At the age of 20, Eileen tried to escape her life by hitchhiking to Florida and marrying a 69-year-old man named Lewis Fell. Lewis Fell was a successful businessman who settled into semi-retirement as the president of a yacht club. Eileen moved in with him and immediately started getting into trouble with local law enforcement. She frequently left the home she shared with Fell to go to a local bar, where she often got into fights. She also abused Fell, who later claimed that she beat him with his own cane. Eventually, her elderly husband got a restraining order against her, forcing Eileen to return to Michigan to file for an annulment after just 9 weeks of marriage. Around this time, Eileen's brother, with whom she had had an incestuous relationship, suddenly died of esophageal cancer. Eileen collected his $10,000 life insurance policy and used some of the money to cover the fine for a DUI and bought a luxury car that she then crashed while driving under the influence. In 1986, Eileen's life took a darker turn, where she met Tyria Moore, a woman who became her romantic partner and accomplice in her later crimes. Together, they embarked on a life of crime and survival, with Eileen continuing to work as a sex worker and committing
It's unbelievable. This woman is just literally really never stood a chance in her life. Her life was based around abuse and sex workers. Like, never stood a chance. Never stood a chance. Again, it doesn't undo what she did, but she did a lot of shit leading up to that will mess up someone mentally.
robberies to sustain their nomadic existence. Between 1989 and 1990, Eileen's life spiraled further out of control. During this period, she murdered 7 men, most of whom were believed to be her clients during her sex work activities. Her modus operandi typically involved luring men into secluded areas, robbing them, and then shooting them at point-blank range. Eileen claimed that she acted in self-defense, stating that the killings were in response to attempted sexual assaults. Her list of victims is as follows. Richard Mallory was a 51-year-old convicted rapist who Eileen claimed to have killed in self-defense on November 30, 1989. 2 days later, a Volusia County, Florida deputy sheriff found Mallory's abandoned vehicle. On November 13th, his body was found several miles away in a wooded area. He had been shot several times, but 2 bullets to the left lung were found to have been the cause of death. In May 1990, Eileen killed 43-year-old David Spears by shooting him 6 times and stripping his corpse naked. Charles Carskadon, a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker, went missing on March 31, 1990. On June 6, his body was found in Pasco County, Florida. He had been shot 9 times with a small caliber weapon. 65-year-old Peter Siems.
I think this is the flaw, right? Is the first guy, you absolutely could have, if you killed that one dude, you absolutely could have. The man's a convicted rapist, so you absolutely could have gone away with self-defense. You're a sex worker, and you killed him. You absolutely could have gone away with it. The other ones, you're killing them shooting them 9 times, 6 times, way more than self-defense. You're fully shooting them till they're dead type situation.
Disappeared on a drive from Florida to Arkansas in June 1990. Witnesses later claimed to have seen 2 women matching Tyria and Eileen's descriptions driving his vehicle. Eileen's fingerprints were later recovered from the car and from several of Siem's personal effects that had turned up in local pawn shops. Troy Burres, a 50-year-old sausage salesman from Ocala, Florida, was reported missing on July 31, 1990. On August 4, his body was found in a wooded area along State Road 19 in Marion County, Florida. He had been shot twice. Charles Dick Humphreys, a 56-year-old retired U.S. Air Force major, former state child abuse investigator, and former chief of police, disappeared on September 11, 1990. His body was found the next day in Marion County, Florida. He was fully clothed and had been shot 6 times in the head and torso. His car was found in Suwannee County, Florida. Walter Gino Antonio, a 62-year-old police reservist, disappeared on November 19, 1990. His nude body was found near a remote logging road in Dixie County, Florida. He had been shot 4 times. 5 days later, his car was found in Brevard County, Florida. The police launched an intensive investigation after the discoveries of the bodies of the murdered men. In January 1991, Eileen and Moore went their separate ways. Eileen was arrested for a bar fight and in jail, while Moore returned to her home state of Pennsylvania, where she was caught by the police. The police already knew she was Eileen's accomplice and offered her a plea bargain, whereby they would have her call Eileen and attempt to get a confession out of her. The police booked a motel for Moore, where she would call Eileen, who was in prison at the time. In these calls, Moore pretended to be frightened that the police would pin all the blame for the murders on her. She'd beg Eileen to go over the story with her again, step by step, in order to get their story straight. After 4 days of repeated phone calls, Eileen Wuornos confessed to several of the murders, but insisted over the phone that the killings Moore hadn't known about were all attempted rape. During the trial, Eileen's defense team argued that she acted in self-defense, and that her history of sexual abuse and traumatic experiences contributed to her violent behavior.
I agree with the second part. I agree that her history of sexual assault and traumatic experience caused violent behavior. I can absolutely believe that. Doesn't undo it though. Doesn't make her innocent. Doesn't undo the death. That still was caused. Trauma was still done. She killed people. The self-defense part doesn't work. She made it so it was a self-defense.
Despite these arguments, she was convicted of 6 of the 7 murders she was charged with. In 1992, Eileen Wuornos was sentenced to death for 6 counts of first-degree murder. Her death sentence was highly controversial, with some advocates arguing that her traumatic upbringing and mental health issues warranted a different outcome. Others, however, believed that the severity of her crimes justified the death penalty. Eileen was incarcerated.
I still say, yeah, death penalty works. If anything, in worst case, it puts her out of her fucking misery. She's been put in a horrible life. It puts her out of her fucking misery. But in this, she committed planned, dangerous crime where she took the life of both, including one who was a chief of police and child abuse investigator. Yeah, these are heinous crimes that would cause a death penalty.
The Florida Department of Corrections Broward Correctional Institution death row for women before she was transferred to a state prison in Florida for her execution. Her appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court was denied in 1996. In a 2001 petition to the Florida Supreme Court, Eileen stated her intention to dismiss her legal counsel and terminate all pending appeals. "I killed those men," she wrote, "robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance of keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this 'she's crazy' stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again."
Fucking hell. I still go, she's crazy. I'm sorry, I know she doesn't like that, but she's not all there, but I also agree with the last line, which is, "I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." I believe you. I believe you.
Eileen's execution took place on October 9, 2002. She was pronounced dead at 9:47 a.m. During her last interview, she was quoted as saying, "I'd like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." I suppose it's easy to feel sorry for Eileen, as she obviously had a very difficult upbringing, especially with the treatment she received at the hands of her grandfather and his friends. It's likely that she really did kill her first victim in self-defense, as Richard Mallory was indeed a convicted rapist. So he most likely went back to his old ways and ended up paying the price. It seems unlikely that all of her victims had attempted to attack her first though, and that she probably got a taste for killing men after Mallory's murder. Regardless, she died as one of the United States' most infamous serial killers of the last 30 or so years. Yet another serial killer who operated as part of a duo, Otis Elwood Toole, was born on March 5, 1947 in Jacksonville, Florida. His childhood was marked by chaos and instability. His mother, Mary Toole, was a prostitute, and his father was reportedly a violent alcoholic. Growing up in such an environment, Toole experienced neglect and abuse, leaving deep emotional scars that would influence his actions in the years to come. He was assaulted by almost every person he thought he could trust. His mother dressed him up as a girl, his older sister raped him before he was 10 years old, and his father prostituted him to a neighbor when he was only 5. Toole's education was disrupted early on, and he struggled academically due to his learning disabilities and behavioral problems. As a result, he never completed high school, and his lack of formal education further contributed to his alienation from society. Toole's criminal involvement began at an early age. In his teens, he engaged in petty theft and arson, displaying signs of antisocial behavior and a fascination with fire. When he was just 14 years old, he killed a person for the very first time. After a traveling salesman tried to pick him up for sex, Toole ended up running him over with his own car. At the age of 17, he was arrested for setting fire to a local church, hinting at the violence that would soon follow. In 1976, Toole's life took a dark turn when he met fellow drifter and drugged-out alcoholic Henry Lee Lucas in a soup kitchen. Like Toole, Lucas had already killed before, having served 10 years in prison for murdering his own mother. The two formed a twisted bond, and Toole began to follow Lucas as a loyal accomplice in his own descent into violence and murder. Together, they embarked on a spree of crimes across multiple states, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. Between 1976 and 1983, Toole and Lucas were responsible for a chilling series of murders. They preyed upon anyone they could find, including hitchhikers, sex workers, and migrants. Their victims were often women, and the crimes involved acts of extreme violence, including rape, mutilation, and necrophilia. Their lack of a discernible pattern and their ability to move undetected between states made them difficult to track down. The two were actually romantically involved with each other, but their romance came to an end when Lucas apparently showed interest in Toole's teenage niece. He left Toole and ran away with the girl. Toole was reportedly so enraged at Lucas's betrayal that he killed 9 people to, quote, blow off steam. Lucas settled with Toole's niece on a ranch in Texas until the two got into an argument, at which point he murdered her, dismembered her body, and scattered the remains in a nearby field. Then, Lucas lured the woman who owned the ranch out to the same field, killed her, and stuffed her body into a drainage pipe. Soon afterward, Lucas was arrested in Texas in 1983. Meanwhile, Toole was separately imprisoned in Florida in 1984 for burning a 64-year-old man alive. Surprisingly, Henry Lee Lucas wasn't arrested for murder. He'd actually been arrested for possession of a deadly weapon, but once he was in custody, he began to talk about his murders to any police officer who would listen. Otis Toole was far more reluctant to talk about his crimes at first, but once he learned that Lucas was taking the police on guided tours at their murder sites, he soon began backing up his and Lucas's claims. By his count, they'd murdered 108 people. One of the most infamous cases linked to Toole and Lucas was the murder of Adam Walsh, the 6-year-old son of America's Most Wanted host, John Walsh. Toole insisted that he was Walsh's murderer. He even argued with the police when they doubted his claims. He told them, quote, "Oh no, I killed him too. There's no doubt about that." According to him, he had snatched the child from the Sears parking lot in 1981. After decapitating him with a machete, he drove around with the head in his car for so long that he forgot it was there. When he later noticed it, he simply tossed it into a canal. Meanwhile, Henry Lee Lucas readily confessed to more than 600 murders. "I made the police look stupid," he boasted. "I was out to wreck Texas law enforcement." However, the credibility of their confessions was often questioned. Toole had a history of making false statements, and it was challenging to corroborate all their claims with substantial evidence. Despite this, Toole was convicted of several murders and remained a suspect in many others. In 1984, Otis Toole was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of 64-year-old George Sonnenberg. However, his death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in 1993 due to doubts about the credibility of his confessions and the lack of concrete evidence. Toole's mental health issues further complicated the legal proceedings. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and was prone to impulsive behavior and erratic statements, making it difficult to determine the extent of his culpability in the crimes. To this day, no one is exactly sure how many people Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole killed. There's no telling how much of their story is true. A district attorney named Ken Anderson, who prosecuted Lucas, said he believed that they had killed anywhere from 3 to 1 dozen people. "I don't think he knew exactly," Anderson said. "It's difficult to imagine you can rely on anything he said, but the fact remains he was a serial killer, even though we're unable to pinpoint the exact number." Otis Toole died of liver failure in prison in 1996. Henry Lee Lucas died of heart failure in prison in 2001, taking the truth of their crimes with him to the grave. Regardless of how many people Otis Toole killed, it really is shocking to think a man with an IQ of just 75 may have killed dozens, if not potentially over 100 people. But as it stands, we'll never know just how horrifying this monster's reign of terror really was.
Frederick Todd Lee.
We're getting into the really low IQs now. Anything lower than 70 is actually within the, quote, mentally disabled range. Derek Todd Lee was born on November 5th, 1968 in St. Francisville, Louisiana. Raised in poverty, he came from a troubled family background marked by domestic violence and instability. His father was absent, and his mother reportedly struggled with alcoholism and mental health issues.
That seems to be a common one, isn't it? Look at this guy who's most thing has been alcoholism. Like, that's in every one of these, I'm pretty sure. That someone in the family deals with alcohol. One of the parents deal with alcoholism. I don't know why it's such a common thing here, but it is.
Growing up in such a tumultuous environment, Derek faced neglect and abuse, which left deep emotional scars that would manifest in his later actions. Lee's early years were also marked by learning disabilities and difficulties in school. Mentally challenged, Derek was put into a special education class and was bullied by classmates who called him, quote, retarded. He had difficulty maintaining relationships and frequently got into trouble with the law due to petty crimes. At the age of 13, on November 8, 1981, he was arrested for burglarizing and vandalizing a candy store, and on the same day, he assaulted a woman in front of his mother. 3 years later, on August 8, 1984, he was arrested on suspicion of murdering a civilian, but was released. As Derek reached adulthood, his violent tendencies became increasingly apparent. He faced multiple arrests for various crimes, including burglary, theft, and drug offenses. Reports suggested that he had an aggressive temperament and had made disturbing statements about his desire to harm women. In 1997, Derek committed his first confirmed murder. targeting 34-year-old Eugenie Bosfontaine. Her brutal murder set off a series of similar murders in Baton Rouge and Lafayette, with young women becoming the target of his violent spree. Between 1998 and 2003, Derek Todd Lee terrorized the Baton Rouge and Lafayette communities with a series of brutal murders. His victims were often young women, typically attacked in their homes during nighttime hours. His modus operandi involved entering the residence of the victims, sexually assaulting them, and then murdering them with savage brutality. 28-year-old Randy Maybrewer was Derek Todd Lee's second victim. She disappeared on April 18, 1998 in Baton Rouge. She was brutally raped, beaten, and stabbed to death. 41-year-old Gina Green became his third victim on September 24, 2001. Her body was discovered in the woods near her home in Baton Rouge. Like Derek's other victims, she had been sexually assaulted and brutally murdered. 21-year-old Charlotte P. Murray was murdered on May 31, 2002 in Baton Rouge. Her body was discovered in her home. Like the other victims, she had been sexually assaulted and subjected to extreme violence. Pam Kinnamore was murdered on July 12, 2002 in Baton Rouge. She was 44 years old at the time of her death. Her body was found in her home, where she had been sexually assaulted and viciously killed, with Derek slashing her throat. Trenisha Danae Colombe, aged 23, was murdered on November 12, 2002. Her body was discovered in the parking lot of an apartment complex in Baton Rouge. Once again, the crime...
This guy's insane for the fact he's just seeing a woman and killing them. Like, he's not even really has a specific type or specific age group. He's just, if you're a woman, pretty much you could, women above a certain age, he's coming for you.
Crime bore the hallmarks of Derek's modus operandi, involving sexual assault and brutal violence, with Colombe being beaten to death with a tree branch. On December 27, 2002, Geraldine DeSoto...
The fuck? Who killed someone with a tree branch? What the actual fuck? Killed with a tree branch. That's next level thought process right there.
Became another one of his victims. She was 21 years old at the time of her murder. Her body was found in her Baton Rouge residence, where she'd been sexually assaulted and killed. 26-year-old Carrie Lynn Yoder was murdered on March 3, 2003. Her body was found in the woods near her residence. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. The reign of terror that Derek imposed on the communities resulted in fear, panic, and widespread concern for public safety. Local law enforcement and investigators faced significant pressure to apprehend the elusive killer and put an end to the violence. For a while, Lee was suspected as the murderer of Randy Maybrewer and was put under police watch. During May 2003, investigators found a match to the DNA samples taken from Carrie Lynn Yoder and pinned Lee as the key.
I don't like this picture. I don't like this picture. This picture's weird. I don't like the look of it. His eyes are way too bulged out of his head. How long have we been filming? Oh no, I'm just gonna check something. I think I've been 2 minutes, not bad. Okay. But I don't know, yeah, his eyes are too bulged out of his head. I don't like this. I don't like this photo. Look at this. His eyes are too bulged, way too wide. Like, holy crap.
Key suspect. At the time, Lee had fled with his family to Chicago and then Atlanta to escape the murder charges. It took a joint FBI Metropolitan Atlanta Police Force squad to apprehend Lee in a local hotel, and he was returned to Louisiana, where the authorities discovered Lee's already extensive rap sheet. The police department was immediately criticized by Baton Rouge residents due to the investigation's shift of focus onto a man of color, as well as the fact that they overlooked him when Lee was suspected of the murders of Randy Maybrewer and another woman, Connie Warner. They decided that the DNA tests found at the Maybrewer scene was too expensive to pursue, though authorities were able to pin Maybrewer's murder onto Lee through DNA at the very end of the case, but they were unable to trace a connection between him and Warner, and she remains listed as a suspected victim. Her body was dumped outside during the time of Hurricane Andrew, and no DNA remained when her body was discovered. As for Lee, he was held in the East Baton Rouge Parish's prison, with the Baton Rouge Senior Assistant District Attorney John Sinkfield seeking the death penalty for him if convicted. During his trial, Derek faced many allegations against him and was being charged for 7 counts of murder. In the end, he was found guilty of the murders for the confirmed victims, Geraldine DeSoto and Charlotte P. Murray. The family's victims were both traumatized and exhausted by the capital case trial and decided to discontinue prosecution after he received the death penalty in the prosecution of Charlotte Murray. The defense argued that he should be exempt from the death penalty as his IQ was deemed too low for him to be held accountable. However, due to his adequate decision making and his past work experience including reading schematics and passing the truck driving license test, the jury rejected the statement that he was mentally challenged and decided to sentence him to death. In December 2004,
Interesting. So they went to go. They're like, hey, they're like, nah. He was able to look at schematics and past work and understand them, and he was able to pass a truck driver's license test. So clearly, he was able to do things and study and read things fine. He's not mentally challenged.
Sentence was given out and Derek was put on death row. On January 21st, 2016, Derek died while awaiting execution of his sentence. He had been housed at the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola and experienced heart-related issues that required a pacemaker. He was transported to an area hospital where he later died. Derek Todd Lee was essentially the exact opposite of an evil genius. A man with an IQ as low as his really shouldn't have been able to evade the police for as long as he did. Yet somehow this man, who was apparently so dim-witted that he needed special education classes, managed to kill 8 women before he was finally caught.
Last one is John Straffen, IQ of 64.
We finally arrived at the serial killer with the lowest IQ at only 64. John Thomas Straffen was born on February 27, 1930 in Borden, Hampshire, England. He was the youngest of 3 siblings. Straffen's early life was marked by adversity and hardships. His parents divorced when he was young, and his father abandoned the family, leaving his mother to care for the children alone. His family struggled financially, and his mother, who was overwhelmed with the responsibility of raising the children, was unable to provide them with a stable and nurturing environment. Straffen's intellectual disabilities became apparent early in his life, and he faced challenges with learning and comprehension. As a result, he struggled to keep up with his peers academically and had difficulty in school. At the age of 10, Straffen was sent to a special school for children with learning disabilities. However, the institution's care and support were inadequate, and he experienced neglect and harsh treatment. The environment of the institution exasperated his feelings of isolation and alienation, leading to behavioral problems and aggressive outbursts. Without adequate guidance or intervention, he struggled to understand and control his impulses. Straffen's violent tendencies became evident during his time in the institution. On July 27, 1947, a 13-year-old girl reported to police that a boy called John had assaulted her by putting his hand over her mouth and saying, "What would you do if I killed you? I have done it before." This incident was not connected to Straffen until later. 6 weeks later, Straffen was found to have strangled 5 chickens belonging to the father of a girl with whom he had cheerfully confessed to it, and many other incidents to which he had not been connected. He was remanded in custody, and the medical officer of Horfield Prison examined him, certifying that he was, quote, mentally retarded. On October 10th of that year, Straffen was committed to Hortham Colony in Bristol under the Mental Deficiency Act of 1913. He exhibited aggressive behaviour towards both staff and fellow residents. These outbursts, coupled with his inability to comprehend the consequences of his actions, resulted in frequent incidents and disciplinary problems. Straffen's violent behaviour would escalate from acting out in institutional settings to committing heinous crimes outside the confines of these facilities. On July 15, 1951, Straffen visited the cinema unaccompanied. His route took him past 1 Camden Crescent in Bath, where 5-year-old Brenda Goddard lived with her foster parents. According to Straffen's later statement to the police, he saw Brenda gathering flowers and offered to show her a better place. He lifted Brenda over the fence, after which she fell and hit her head on the stone. She was unconscious, and he strangled her. Straffen did not make any attempt to hide the body, and simply continued to the cinema to watch the film Shockproof, and returned home. This heinous crime led to his apprehension and detention at the high-security psychiatric institution. He managed to escape on October 29, 1952. During his escape, he went to the same cinema where he met 9-year-old Cicely Batstone. He offered to take her to another cinema, at which point the two caught a bus to a meadow known as Tumps, on the outskirts of Bath, where Straffen strangled Batstone to death. Unfortunately for Straffen, several witnesses saw him with Batstone, leading to his arrest. He was considered to be mentally unfit to stand trial, and was moved to Broadmoor Mental Institution in Berkshire. Under Broadmoor,
I don't know why they keep sending him to mental institutions. He clearly just is able to escape them. They're clearly not protecting them that well, fucking keeping guard that well.
Straffen was given a job as a cleaner. On April 29, 1952, Straffen went with an attendant and another patient, which were close to the 10-foot tall exterior wall. In the small yard opposite the wall was a low shed with a sloping roof, which was 8.5 feet high at its highest point. Straffen asked his supervisor if he could shake his duster, and upon receiving permission, went into the yard. Once the other patient had gone back in, Straffen climbed onto the roof and jumped over the wall. He had already made sure he had his civilian clothes under his work clothes. Only 20 minutes after escaping, Straffen came to a private drive in Crowthorne and approached Mrs. Doris Spencer, who was in her garden. He asked her for a drink of water, which she gave him, and then discussed the proximity of Broadmoor and the likelihood of escapes. After 10 minutes, he left. An hour and a half later, he reached Farley Hill, and at about 5 o'clock, Straffen came to the point where 5-year-old Linda Boyer was riding her bicycle around the village. Within half an hour, Linda Boyer was dead, having been strangled. Straffen then asked for a cup of tea from another householder, Mrs. Kenyon, who agreed to drive him to the bus stop. As they were driving to the bus stop, Straffen saw some men in uniform and asked whether they were police. On learning that they were, he swiftly got out of the car and ran away. Kenyon told the men, who were actually Broadmoor nurses in disguise, of the suspicious behaviour of her passenger, and Straffen was recaptured a few minutes later. In the car journey back to Broadmoor, Straffen said, "I have finished with crime." The body of Linda Boyer was found at dawn the next day. Police questioned Straffen and asked him if he had committed any crimes during his escape, to which Straffen replied, "I didn't kill her. I didn't kill the girl on the bike." He was immediately arrested and charged with Linda's murder. At his trial, it only took 1 hour for the jury to find Straffen guilty, and he was sentenced to death. He was scheduled to be executed on September 2nd of that year, but on August 29th, the Home Secretary contacted the Queen herself and asked her to change Straffen's sentence to life in prison without parole. In 2001, his solicitors called for his case to be reopened on the grounds that Straffen had never been fit to stand trial. His story was also taken up by an investigative journalist who used previously confidential records to reveal that Straffen was given a reprieve from his death sentence after a succession of doctors ruled he had been insane. Regardless, the application to reopen the case was turned down in December 2002. John Straffen died at Franklin Prison in County Durham on November 19, 2007.
Someone explain this to me, why it takes so long for someone to be sentenced to death? This was on 1940s, this guy was captured, he wasn't sentenced to death or didn't die till 2007? Fucking hell. Why y'all take so long?
He was 77 years old and had been the UK's longest serving prisoner after being incarcerated for 55 years. Following his death, Ian Brady would become the UK's longest serving prisoner until his own death in 2017. As of this video, John Straffen's record has been broken by Dundee school shooter Robert Moan, who will have spent 56 years in prison on November 1st, 2023, assuming he lives that long. Unlike almost everyone else on this list, it might be a bit hard to call John Straffen evil, as it seems he really was insane and had almost no control over his actions. On the other hand, his victims were all children, which is obviously unforgivable, and he was clearly too much of a danger to others to be allowed to roam free. In the end, prison really was the only place a man like him could live out the remainder of his life. He's proof that it really doesn't matter how, quote, dumb someone is, and that even a man as mentally challenged as him is capable of committing acts of murder.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this reaction video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank y'all for watching. I'll see y'all for the next one.